Yeah, so let's be back on track in terms of the 5 big things, right?
Yeah.
The first thing we talked about food. The next thing, we've already spent a lot of time jumping in this because we talked about movement, all right?
Yeah.
Now, I use movement instead of exercise because exercise can be a dirty word for some people. Probably no one listening to the podcast, but exercise is this idea where we have to do this thing in order to be healthy. And it's not necessarily true that we have to exercise as much as we have to be very conscious of the movement we're doing, right? There's a reason that people who are doing movement in the form of work don't necessarily need to do it when they hit all of the main key pieces. All right. One part of my practice, and something that we haven't really talked about much, is the idea is that people are interested in looking for health optimization, and they're interested in what can I do now to decrease my risk for X, Y, and Z, expand my health span, and focus on how I don't prematurely die. It's simply as way it looks at it, right? It's longevity is a piece of it, but it's not really longevity because we are really good at creating longevity with our current medical system. So from an exercise standpoint, I talked about all the things that I find to be very important. I think my exercise plan is evolving. I think everyone's is. We have to use the time we have, and I think of all of the 5 things, exercise is a huge time. I mean, it takes a ton of time, right? We really have to be able to do that. So the way we already kind of discussed it, I think is the way I want to focus on it. And the big issue for most people, probably not listening to this, but is where is the muscle going? All right. At the age of 50 and moving on there, we lose about 1% of lean mass, 2 to 3% of strength, and even more power every year for the rest of the life. So you don't see 80-year-old people busting out of their shirts, right? You just don't see it. And that's because we lose that muscle. If we don't very diligently, deliberately create a plan to decrease that risk, it will go away. And it might anyway, but the idea is we're going to push it out as long as we possibly can. And if we can't optimize for that, it's going to be a problem, right? Yeah. And if there's one thing that is as close as we possibly can to a panacea for health, it's probably exercise. It's really hard to pick anything else. Now, I'm going to make an argument for it against here in a second with sleep, but I'm just telling you that that is a huge thing. If we had a pill that does everything that exercise does, we would all be taking the pill. Right? Which means we all should exercise, and I think probably 99% of people on the podcast are, but I mean, outside of that, in the world, it's not the case. In the United States, it's not the case, right? So that's an issue. We become more and more sedentary.
Yeah, I think that's really good because we preach it on here, and yes, Roman and I, I've ran a marathon, I resistance train, but a lot of the times what's I like about talking about this is people think you have to resistance train 6 days a week to be healthy and look strong. And most of the time we say, no, most of the time, kind of do what you want. You're saying, I enjoy running, but I found that I can knock out 2 things at once by biking. Yeah. And I think that's very important because just because I like bodybuilding and powerlifting and functional lifting, you might not like that. And I think that's a lot of the time. I think that's why people hate that word. Sure. And some people, if you are listening and for some reason you don't like that word as well, but the thing is, what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is, you find an exercise plan and routine that you like, not that Tyler likes or Antoine likes. Right. It's not that. And I've never preached it. I even had someone ask me, they just graduated from college. They want to build muscle. They want to resistance train. A really good bowler, by the way. The guy has bowled a 300. And I don't know if you're really intelligent with bowling, but that's a pretty damn near impossible score for someone like me. I don't know about you. Maybe you're a good bowler. No. but he was telling me simple as this. It's hey, can you give me some advice? I want to work out and resistance train 6 days a week. And then when I look at that, and he might have resistance trained in the past, and I didn't ask him those questions, but something like that is it throws that red flag. It's buddy, you're not going to enjoy that. Sure. Why don't you just do 2 or 3 days a week and bowl the rest of the week? Because I know he enjoys bowling. Right. And this is a simple text message. Yeah. Right. I'm hey, why don't you just save those 4 other days? Why don't you play basketball or bowl? Yeah. Do something that you enjoy, because I think a lot of the the negative sides of the lifting industry is you need to lift 5 or 6 days a week. Sometimes people would 7 days a week. And I don't know if I told you over the phone or if I said this already, but I get my blood work done every year. If I told you I lifted 7 days a week, I ran every day, And let's throw on like I biked like 3 days a week. I mean, in a general standpoint, or like, you know, like if I got my blood work done, my hormones would be like in the tank. You know, like, you know, my testosterone would be in the tank. My estrogen would be pretty high, you know, because those simple, like overdoing it and overworking it just because you're working towards it is never going to be always a positive effect. Right. And people are always like, oh yeah, David Goggins can run 200 miles. Let me run 200 miles. But if you guys listen to like someone like him, he did his work. He did his like, you know, motivational stuff, but his knees are like grinded to the bone. Like he like soon enough, he's not even going to be able to run anymore. And you know, does he have any regrets? No. But is that a healthy like standpoint within like exercise and the relationship to exercise? Yeah. Probably not. Yeah. So I wanted to throw that quickly.
For sure. Well, I think that brings up a good point, and it's something that's very important to any plan that we create. Yeah. Is sustainability. Right. Yeah. I can very easily, I mean, I would say maybe 75-80%. I don't actually have real numbers on this. I ask everybody what their goals are, and the majority of people say lose weight. All right, the majority of
people. And then the funny thing is, like, someone like me is, right now, my goal is not to lose weight.
Sure.
And you probably don't hear that often. Like, right now, I'm, like, maintaining.
Yeah.
Maintaining or maybe gain a pound or two won't hurt me.
But the issue is that, one, weight loss is not really a very good goal. Right.
And also could be negative. Like someone like you, if you saw yourself and you said lose weight, well, you look like you're under 10% or close to 10 to 15% body fat.
Under 10%.
Yeah.
For the record.
So, but you know what I'm saying? Like someone like you, I can eyeball it. So it's like under 10%.
Yeah.
Like if you would have saw yourself and you said like lose weight, you'd be like, but why?
Yeah, right.
Or like, what do you see? Why do you see yourself losing weight to be more healthy? But go ahead.
Here's the part that people don't understand about that is this isn't the point I wanted to initially make, but when you lose weight, everybody, you lose lean mass. All right, which means you lose muscle tissue. On average, probably.
So, but what about the opposite? People always think you can somehow build muscle without gaining fat, or
no, you could definitely gain weight. I don't know the numbers on that like I do with losing, because I think losing is important because we get to the point where if you're 200 pounds, you go to 225 pounds, you're back to 200 pounds. The amount of caloric intake you can take at that new 200 pounds, even though the weight's exactly the same as the less, is the question of why. Like, why did that happen? If you're losing lean mass and you're not deliberately trying to maintain your mass, there's a question of why do you think your level of, your base metabolic rate is decreasing, right? Yeah. You're losing that muscle, right? So that's not really the point of what I was trying to say, but the idea is like we need to think about that, where the goal of weight loss is not a good goal.
Yeah.
Okay, the goal of weight loss, if your BMI is 55, for most people that's very high. Weight loss is definitely a goal, but we do not want to lose muscle in the process.
What about someone who's got a high BMI, but their muscle lean mass is pretty high?
Yeah, well, the BMI means little to nothing.
That's right? I wanted to ask that because I know you're gonna.
If you can find someone with a BMI of 50 that's only muscle, I'll give you a.
Now that no,
bucks. But
closer to like the mid-20s.
Exactly, right, exactly. So, but the point is that like when we're talking about losing that, we need to be very conscious of the fact that the goal really isn't to lose weight, although that's what everyone thinks is the right thing to do, and unfortunately, even for women, more so. There's a lot of these social pressures that say this is what you have to look like and this is what you have to do. But we could probably get in that for a while. The point of what I was trying to say is when you're creating a plan, we're interested in creating sustainability.
Yeah.
Right? If you cannot do this plan the rest of your life, it's not a good plan, right? We know the term yo-yo dieting gets thrown around a lot. The idea of working hard and then not doing anything, or eating really well, not doing anything.
So I can't do a juice cleanse? But go ahead. Yeah. Sorry. I like to throw the joke. But
yeah, for sure. So the point of it is that, there is certain you can help the body to kind of clean out things, clean out whatever you want to call it, detoxify, biotransform, cleanse, whatever it is. You can do that with real food. You don't need to bring in something where you're not eating solid food. That's a fine way to do it. Or you could just stop eating garbage. That's the other way too, right? But when we're talking about sustainability, I don't really care if you lose 30 pounds if you're going to gain it back, because if anything, you're now worse off than you were before that even happened. right? And that's a problem because we're interested in maintaining the weight loss over a long period of time, right? Because that's the hardest part of weight loss altogether.
And then real quickly to ask that question is, do you think it's important then, instead of just losing weight, is like, let's just say like trying to lose like bad weight, like fat, would it be beneficial to decrease body fat and increase like muscle mass? Is that because that's always been my goal, right? Yeah. And you said it earlier, it's like you eating at 200 pounds could increase or decrease. And I have a good understanding of it. Some people might not, but like if you had more muscle mass on your body, instead of like decreasing just total weight and decreasing muscle mass, is there a benefit then to just like try to lose body fat and keep lean muscle mass up?
Right, which is, I mean, if we could all do that, we all would, right? I mean,
I know
sign up for that real quick.
Yeah, give me that pill where I can lose all my body fat somehow and keep all the muscle mass.
There's two parts to this, and of course, there's never an easy answer. Is one of the reasons that with my health optimizers, we're now shifting more towards doing DEXA scans for body composition, or a lot of people are using biometric scales. We do have a biometric scale here. There's obviously limitations to that, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to get an understanding of what is your lean mass, what is your visceral adiposity. All right, visceral adiposity is fat that's in the gut. All right, it's in around all the tissues. All right, we know there's a very distinct difference between visceral fat versus subcutaneous. Subcutaneous is like what's under the skin, right? So if we're trying to improve health, we want to be able to decrease visceral fat because that is directly linked to cardiovascular events, which is the number one killer of all people. And lean mass, increased lean mass is increased to, the more lean mass you have, the less likely you are to die, right? So that's what we're interested in the long run. So absolutely, like, can we increase muscle mass and decrease visceral adiposity? That's the goal. Is there a way to do that? Yeah, there's a bunch of ways to do that, but it's also not an easy thing to do all the time. But the other question on the other end of it is we're talking about, percentage of fat. Like if you're, especially for the competitions, if your fat percentage goes under 7%, your testosterone's taking a big hit there, right? So like, we have a lot of people on.
And that's happened to me.
Yeah.
I was in very low testosterone to the point where I had to rebound and introduce pounds back because of the fact that when I saw the doctor and did the blood work, I mean, my free testosterone was like in sub 100s.
Yeah, right.
And with the healthy scale, I guess it varies because it's
you probably want it just for the people. Like, if it's between 400 and 800, it's probably a good range. So like 100 is pretty low.
And I just got my blood work done 4 weeks ago, and I'm in the 800s. Yeah, and naturally, right? Like no testosterone replacement therapy, none of that stuff. Right. Yeah. And keep going. Sorry.
So we talk about each of the topics, but let's as best we can reverse the time, do our best. Yeah. But I want to touch on the last three. I don't think that one is any more important than the other. Yeah. And I know you had recently had a podcast on sleep, and I think that's something that's probably one of my obsessions when it comes to the lifestyle things, is because it is truly one of the most important things in that, you're like, hey, well, you said that about food, and hey, you said that about exercise. It's so important that my lecture I give on this is called Sleep is Number One. The number of people I've had come to me about weight loss, again, they say, I want to lose weight. I'm like, well, how much are you sleeping? 5.5 hours. It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen, all right? Like, you're giving your body certain inputs, whether it's food or movement or sleep deprivation. If you give your body an input that says, we are in a state of panic, why in the world is it going to want to do anything else other than store food away and even increase the anxiety? Yeah. Sleep deprivation is probably one of the biggest things that we have going on right now, that if we were to fix that, we could fix, the amount of money that it could save us in general from the economy standpoint would be huge, right? Yeah,
and also to just add on what you're saying is, unfortunately, there's so many substances that like interrupt sleep compared to hey, I can have 8 hours of sleep every night. Yeah. But see, the thing is, a lot of the populations, and I think what you're mentioning with that sleep podcast too, is like the research shows that, yeah, I get it. Like, people like to enjoy alcohol. They enjoy marijuana sometimes. And see, the thing is, there's so much effects, especially before bedtime, where people won't understand. It's like people will say like, oh yeah, I just have one glass of wine, a couple of times a week. But when are you having that glass of wine? Are you having it before bed? Yeah, typically after dinner. Yeah. And see, the thing is, some people will be like, why sleep 8 hours? But like, you can go into it very highly, and I know I can go into it quite a bit with sleep, but like something like that, and it's like happening 3 to 4 times a week, like just because you had one drink, and then now you interrupted the first like 3 or 4 hours of sleep. And also a big thing too is, people have families, they have jobs, they're trying to, aka the hustle, and we're talking a lot of the people. I mean, I bet you have the same experience, but like when you hang out with like older folks at like a wedding, or dinner, we're talking about people ingesting caffeine from coffee at like 8 p.m. and their bedtime is 10 p.m. Right. So something as little as those like 3 ideas can impact sleep so much. And I know you can get into that, but you're saying is like, in a perfect world, if we fix that, like you could fix a lot of like weight issue, health issues, and stuff like that. But go ahead. I want to hear what you say.
Yeah, so typically the way I like to summarize this is the level of importance is for every presentation I do, I pull out the CDC causes of death in the United States, and we work through this. And we have a discussion that says, what are the impacts of sleep on each one of these, right? Cardiovascular disease is the first one. So this includes heart attacks and strokes, other cardiovascular disease. What is the impact of it? Well, it's huge. Every 39 seconds, someone dies from a heart attack, which I think is a shame because it is largely preventable, right? When we're talking about sleep, when do heart attacks occur? Now, a lot of people don't know this. It's the first thing in the morning, right? This is when cortisol is at its highest. Now, that theme is going to carry across a couple of different lifestyle things, but sleep deprivation causes an increase in cortisol. Cortisol, for those who don't know, essentially, we think of it as like, it's when you are stressed, that goes up. It's almost like adrenaline to a certain point. Now, adrenaline is a different hormone than cortisol, but that's kind of the way to think about it. And as you think about that aspect, when you're super stressed, cortisol is high. When you are caloric deficit, your cortisol can go up. When you are exercising too much, we talked about. Now, it's good to exercise to make it go up, but too much obviously is a problem. Sleep deprivation causes an issue. So we're talking about heart disease. Like sleep deprivation is a huge piece of it. What's the next thing? Cancer is the next thing. We're talking about that. I think it's the American College of Oncology. I can't remember right now. It is sleep deprivation has been classified under essentially the name of shift work as a likely carcinogen, right? Like we're talking about people who work at night, which, I mean, very important to our society. Yeah. And I've worked more nights than I ever want to, ever again, for residency. Yes. But understanding that people in that are doctors and nurses and things, they have an increased incidence of cancer as a result of sleep deprivation due to shift work, right? This is an important aspect. Now, we go down the list more. In 2020, the third thing was COVID, all right? We're talking about COVID. How is sleep involved in COVID? One of the things that we found that was potentially beneficial from a supplement standpoint was melatonin, right? Now, we can go and talk about that for a while, but the question is why? If we can optimize and improve sleep, it improves the immune system. If you have if your immune system's not working, and everyone has a story, when did you get sick? Well, I got sick after the wedding. I got sick after the party. I got sick after this. You didn't sleep. You were around a bunch of people, and you have all this scenario. It just doesn't go well, right? You're setting yourself up for failure in many regards in that way. And cancer is the same way. Cancer is circulating throughout our body, and the exception to the rule with cancer is it grows out of control. Yeah. If the immune system's not there to identify that, that's where it becomes a problem. Now, my last point here is in terms of, it's kind of doom and gloom, but it's really not that hard because you have to get to X amount of sleep, and we know everything gets better is accidents. All right, accidents is it's almost always in the top 5 causes of death. And what causes accidents? Falling and car accidents. All right, those are probably the most important things. We're talking about falling. We're talking about fractures. We're talking about car accidents. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. Yeah. What causes car accidents? People not paying attention, right? Well, or falling asleep, or looking at phones, right? And sleep deprivation makes all of that worse, right, across the board. So yeah, I mean, I can talk about sleep for a while. But
I was gonna say, we've even talked about, like even the melatonin issue.
Yeah, right. It's a whole nother issue. Yeah.
Yeah, especially when you can buy that stuff over the counter.
Right. And it's not regulated, and there's a whole thing there for sure.
But yeah, as I say, I think that's very important because that pillar of that aspect is like very crucial
for sure.
And I think that's helped me quite a bit. Is like, I think for me it was learning how to wind down for the day. How to kind of slow down because someone like me is an active mind. Like, how do I turn this thing off?
For sure.
And I think there's like a bunch of tools. Like, I think Andrew Huberman has like a whole specialty around sleep and how to get into that deep sleep and how to get to that mental state of sleep. So I'm glad that you brought that up.
I mean, I think we're not really doing anything in terms of helping people with any of these answers. It's more about just talking about them. But I would say if you want to direct people towards sleep, I would direct them towards Matthew Walker's stuff for sure.
Yes, I've actually listened to
and
quite a bit of Matthew.
Read the book Why We Sleep. I mean, it'll scare you into sleeping. If you're having a lot of issues with insomnia, I may not go that route right off the get-go because it sometimes can make that worse. I mean, the importance of it, I can't overstate it. So the last two things that we wanted to talk about, we're slowly working through it.
It's all good. This is all great. I love it.
The next one is stress.
Yeah.
All right. Now, stress is something different for all of us. Like, stress for me is like, there aren't a lot of things that stress me out. I'm very easygoing in that regard. For other people, like, having this conversation would be
stressful,
like horrible, right? So like that would be like so stressful to the point where that's going to have a negative impact on their health, right? We talked about cortisol and heart attacks. We talked about all these things. Like, this stress is so important, and because of the mental health issues we're dealing with now, this stress is all the time. There's so many people walking around out there that their body is saying we're running from a tiger, and doing it constantly, right? And the issue there is like, we have not really been taught adequate stress management strategies to say, how do we go from our fight or flight part of the nervous system to that rest and digest part of the nervous system. Yeah. The number of people that have come to me saying they're in their mid-30s, late 30s, we're having difficulty having a child, right? Yeah. It's becoming more and more prevalent as fertility numbers continue to dwindle over the last decades. You're telling me, I had an individual recently, he says they're sleeping 5 hours, they're working 14-hour days, they're not eating well, and they're not exercising. And they're like, why in the world can I not have a child? Like, why would your body say, if it's running from a tiger, say, no, let's procreate? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, we're sending all these signals that are saying, this is what we want to do. But, the frontal lobe, the brain is saying, I want to do this. And the body's like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
No, like, you can't even get enough water in your system. Why would we have a child? Like, this is not a safe environment for a child, right? So this stress continues to become a huge issue. And as we continue to navigate what we can do to identify stress management strategies, I have said to patients over and over again, this is the hardest thing for me to treat. This is the hardest thing for me to help somebody and say, this is going to help me feel better, because there's no good answer.
Yeah.
And it's a result of, like we talked about before, things in the timeline, past traumas, past issues. COVID in itself created all this mental
stress,
health and different stress, and like, should I wear a mask? Should I not wear a mask? I saw a patient today that wanted to wear a mask, and I respect that and I understand where they're coming from, but it's like understanding the true risks versus the true value of doing something like that is important. But fear, it outweighs that, and it creates a consistent level of stress that, that's a really hard thing to do. We could talk about it for a while. I mean, I've done presentations on meditation and trying to breath work and all these things. We have these tools. We have these intrinsic tools. There's a reason that we've been on this planet for thousands and thousands of years, and it's because we've developed tools that work.
Yeah. I think that's important, because like, a lot of the different tools are going to be different for other people. Yeah. Like you said, meditation's a great tool. Mm-hmm. I come to think of it because I always want to do the most throughout the day. Like I've always, I want to make sure when I wake up, like I get my meal in, I start working, and then maybe I'll take a walk, and then I'll have my first cup of coffee. Sure. It's like some stuff like that I want to make sure I get done. But in a sense of like, well, that could be stressful. Mm-hmm. Or like, back to the meditation point, like I found out where like yoga was like a meditation for me.
Right.
And like something like that. And I preach it all the time. I did like a 30-day challenge with like yoga, and like it was like 10 to 15 minutes,
Sure.
and it helped me throughout my day.
Yeah.
Like I gave the space, and like I just let go of like the thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
Whereas like if I just kept doing that day by day and trying to get the most out of my day, that could potentially hurt my gains. It could potentially hurt my sleep, my relationships, all that good stuff. So I'm glad that you put that out there. One question I do want to ask after that is, a lot of the times, like resistance training is a stress for everybody, right?
Yeah.
You're putting stress on your body, your muscles, and stuff like that. Is that a good stress? Can it be a bad stress? Like, what's your like simple thoughts on that? Obviously, I know you can talk a lot about it, but I just want to know, because I definitely have that, because a lot of people, if this is a lifting, health, fitness podcast, a lot of the times people will be like, well, I don't want to lift because now it's going to stress my body out. I might get sore and that's going to stress me out.
Sure.
I might be doing movements and that's going to stress me out. So it's like, what's your thoughts on like?
Yeah. So I don't know if your audience would be familiar with the concept of hormetic stressors. You guys talk about those?
No.
Okay. So have you heard the concept? So hormetic stress is the idea that it's a stress on the body that creates a positive outcome. All right. So, putting yourself into situations that make you uncomfortable can create hormetic stress. All right. So
more like towards a positive side
correct,
of things.
Right. So exercise is the prime example of hormetic stress. When we talk about other things that cause those things, we talk about things like maybe cold therapy, cryotherapy, ice therapy, cold dunk tanks. We talk about heat therapy. We're talking about saunas. We're talking about...
Yeah, we actually talked about that.
We did. Yeah, we did. So when we're talking about stressors on the body, these what they're referred to as hormetic stresses, where they have an effect on overall body in such a way that comes out with a net positive, right? So exercise falls into this category of hormetic stressor.
It's kind of like also too, sorry to interrupt, but it's like kind of like muscle breakdown, because technically when you resistance train, or if like you're running, biking, whatnot, you're breaking down muscle.
Absolutely.
But when you come back through proper channels, you're technically recovering that and making an improvement.
Right. Yeah.
So go ahead.
You evolve into those things, right? You change into those things. Evolve's probably not the right word, but you kind of move forward and you say, like, these are the types of changes we need. And these hormetic stressors are really important to a lot of different things. Now, you could make an argument for some things more than others, but that's a concept that I think if you haven't talked about it, say bring that into the podcast, talk about what that means and why is it potentially beneficial to have more of those types of stressors in your life, where we're talking about weight training, we're talking about exercise and how we use that to optimize health. There's actually a really good book, and I'm trying to draw the blank on it right now, the name of it, but he talks about how we are too comfortable all the time, right? And we are sedentary, we don't push ourselves, right? We don't have those hormetic stressors, therefore we don't get the upside from those things, right?
So do you think then like that can bleed into like normal life? Like say if say if you had the same job for 30 years, you retire. Yeah. But in those 30 years, instead of like, doing the same thing for 30 years, you go for that job promotion, you go for a different position into that career, or you do stuff on the side, like say you build cabins on the side, but you're a doctor, right? Mm-hmm. And that will lead into like better benefits in life. Do you think that kind of like bleeds into like normal life stuff too as well?
Yeah, I think you could argue that. I think it makes sense. I think the biggest caveat to that would be I don't know how you have scientific data to support it.
Yeah, it's like, okay, we have a standardized trial of 30 doctors and they build cabins on the side. I know I'm using a very strange example, but we don't have it. It'd be very hard to keep that study.
For sure. Yeah.
And also, recognize it as good data.
I think pushing your boundaries is something that, we're talking about a completely different thing, but we're getting a little bit more fringe. But if we start looking into specific types of hormetic stressors, I mean, putting pressure on the body and forcing it to adapt, to those changes. Adapt to those changes.
I had a feeling.
I was having trouble. I was like, evolve, adapt. We're going to get there. Yeah. And pushing it through that, like, that's what you get. That's the name of the podcast. So you're not just talking about muscle, right? We're talking about gains around, right? We're gaining, and you gain those benefits. You give the body the input. Yeah. And it responds by saying, we had this input before, we now want to be ready for when it comes next time. Because if it's life or death, we're ready for it.
And I, that's a great example, because like even the basics of, you know, a lot of the workout plans with resistance training is like you have to do 3 sets of 10, right?
Sure. Yep.
And like, you know this, and some people might not know this, but like if you did 3 sets of 10 for 10 years and you don't do any changes, like, you know, a lot of the times people will be like, well, I don't feel strong. I don't look strong, or I don't feel healthy.
Right.
And I'm not really seeing anything. And then when you ask that simple question, like, well, you haven't put your body through like a typical like stressor to adapt to it.
Sure.
And like for me personally, like I know it's kind of off topic, but like for me, for the hypertrophic side of like lifting and to build and make bigger muscles, I always think instead of doing the 3 sets of 10, and you can kind of relate with like the pillars, is like 3 sets of 10 might be good, but for some reason, you know, obviously there's a lot of those like sleep, eating, like all like everything and stress. Yeah. Like you might get 3 sets of 10 today, but you could probably get 3 sets of 12 the next time, or 3 sets of 8. Yeah. Like say if you slept 5 hours, so you didn't eat as much food, that 3 sets of 8 is probably more likely going to happen. Yeah. And that's why I love like the aspects of like RPE and like how you feel. Yeah. Because a lot of the times is like my wife, we just had our first kid in February and she just started training. She got like, you know, basic like style training, and a lot of the times like those plans, and that's why when I write plans or like try to help people with like their goals with like lifting, is a lot of the times it's like 3 sets of 10, but for some reason you do the first set and like you don't feel it, or for some reason it's just like, you know, you're getting a lot like direct soreness or direct feeling where it's like not feeling right. I think that's like a negative side of with like training and like training modules, because the fact that it's kind of hard, you know, you don't like you said, like if you did the same thing over and over again, might not be such a positive or negative, but if you know, adapt it to something, like if you put yourself through like an extra rep or an extra set, your body might positively like gain from that, or negatively, because on the other side of things, like I've done where it's like, you know, 8 sets of 2, and we're talking like that's like pretty heavy loads, and for some reason like on the 5th set, 6th set, I don't feel like happy about it. I don't feel like I want to do 3 sets, or like I get to like the 5th or 6th set and just like, well, I could barely do 1. And like you get to the point where it's like, okay, well maybe that's not a good idea. So that's, I just wanted to throw that in there with like with like the lifting side of things.
I would say the lifting side of things is like we didn't get into RPE or you know, isometric lifts or time under tension.
We like to throw. I like to throw things around, but yes, keep going.
That's all good. So the last thing, and definitely not least, I would say probably of the 5 pillars that I like to focus on in terms of modifiable lifestyle factors is relationships. I just gave a lecture over at the local gym on this for Senior Day. Is relationships. Now, when we're talking about this, a lot of times it's like, well, yes, I get it, it's important, but how important is it really? And when we're talking to men, I don't know if most of your people listening are men or women, but we're talking about men specifically. 1 in 7.
I think it's like, so it depends. It's like 60-40, some platforms, and it's like 70-30 males. So more heavy on the male, but yes.
1 in 7 males does not have a good friend. All right. So when we're talking about this, we've come closer to this nuclear family and away from this very big family, right? Where you have a lot of people to go to, a lot of people to talk about. And for some reason, even more so in men than in women, this is a problem. We have an epidemic of loneliness is another issue. This was all exacerbated by COVID. People spending too much time with themselves. One of the reasons we're doing this in person is because, to me, the remote thing you don't quite get the same feeling, right? You don't quite get the same energy. And 80% of our communication is nonverbal, right? So like when we're talking about this, we're saying this is really important, right? And this is why we're doing this on video and not just recording it, right? So, but like the relationship piece is so important. And then this relationship extends not only to your friends and your family, this extends to your extended family, extends to people you work with, this extends to relationship with self. This extends to relationship with a higher power if you believe in that, right? That piece is the reason I ask about spirituality and religion. That is important because if your relationship with the higher power or God or multiple gods or whatever it is not in a good place, that is enough to disrupt your health, right? That is enough. We know that people that are associated with organized religion live longer than people who are not, right? I'm not telling everyone to go join a religion, but at the same time, like what I'm saying is there's value in understanding that you have this relationship with whether a person or a being that says, this makes me feel comfortable about where I am in my life. And then we very rarely do we say, where am I at in my relationships, right? How often do you, when you're exercising, you're like, how am I doing? Like you have benchmarks. You're like, where's my weight at? What's my body fat at? What's my strength at? What's my power at? Like you have metrics you use. Like how often do you write out a list and say, where are my relationships? Like how good is my relationship with my sibling? How good is my relationship with my family? We don't do that. And the question is why don't we do that when we know anthropologically that we are beings that require other people. This is why we're doing this, right? We require other people to live. We require other people to have different perspectives. We require other people to help us because we cannot raise a child as an individual. Yeah. You can, but what does everyone say about that? It's really, really hard because we're not really designed to do that, right? Yeah. We use the people around us to help us do those things. And when we don't put a lot of effort into doing that, we lose that. And we start to see, as people age, more in men than women, the lack of friendships, right? And the lack of friendships results in strained significant other relationships, all right? If everything that you take to your significant other is all of your stress and all these other things, you are now putting all of this on the significant other, which is maybe really raising a child together, maybe raising more than one child together. We're talking about stress of your work life and all these other things. Like that one person, it's not their job to handle all of that, right? And, you know, the divorce rate's really, really high, and it's a result of not having a good community or not sitting back and reassessing this and saying, how important is my relationship to, you know, my brother or my best friend or all these other things? Like, do you have relationships in your life that are not relationships anymore? Absolutely, right?
You learn that as you get older. I feel like that's, I mean, that's the biggest one right there. You might not have relationships with quite a bit of people, but go ahead.
And that's okay, and that's understandable. Like if you live in a different state, like you call on the phone, and it's not quite the same effect, right? But when we're talking about these relationships, each of the relationships that you have provides a very different thing. All right, your relationship with your significant other, you know, a lot of people say their best friend and this and that, and that's fine and that's good. You need to have a good relationship with that person. I think when I was younger, my dad had this poster of things. I think it's like 40 things to be successful or something like that. And the number one thing was marry the right person, right? Yeah. And you know what we're talking about? Like, that's very important when you spend the most time with that person. But that becomes more and more important in our society that focuses on nuclear family of just that, right? But your recharge you get from your wife, or I get from my wife, or I get from my best friend, or I get from just someone I work with, whether it's in work or maybe getting a drink after work or something like that, that's different. Right? And that is an important thing that you have to have as part of your life, because if you don't, and you're just seeing one person, talking to one person and just doing that, it causes an issue when, if there is a strain in that relationship, and I see this all the time, 50, 60-year-old people, they get in a divorce, they don't have those other relationshiip. And some people, as they get older, family members die and things of that nature. Now they're at a stage where they're like, how do you make new friends as a 60-year-old person? It's not easy. Nope. And different communities, it's even more difficult, right? So it's a question of how important is that? Loneliness, they estimated 162,000 people in the United States died as a result of something related to loneliness. Right? And we're talking about COVID, we're scared of COVID and this, and I get it, and at the time it was a very dangerous thing, but like that is, to me, more of a problem. And that is an avoidable problem, right? And now we can get into it in more detail. I don't know if you have any specific questions about it, but it's something that we do not sit back and think about.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk probably a bunch about this, but like, I'm like, when during COVID, specifically, like I work from home.
Yeah.
A lot of people work from home,
Sure.
and I'm like a social butterfly, and I think, like you're saying, is very important. And I think there's certain aspects, certain friends, certain family that you're going to go for certain things,
Sure.
and you cannot rely on just a one person or one being.
Yep.
And I think during that time. That's why I love going to the gym and then talking like an actual person, because when I work from home, I can talk to coworkers all day, messaging them on Teams. I can call them, I can go on WebEx and see their face. But like you were saying, that's not really enough, and I don't think it's enough, because the fact that I think what you went back to the point was we're all humans and we need that interaction. So when I think before we're recording, it wasn't when we're recording, but like when I'm at the gym, like when I got out of college, I moved like 30 minutes south. And 30 minutes south might seem pretty short distance, but you don't know anybody 30 minutes south. Like you might not know anybody. And those people 30 minutes north, that might not be, they might not be around as much because you're 30 minutes away.
Right.
So and this is that's why I love the gym and I love working out. When I went to the gym, when I moved out 30 minutes south, it was one of my goals to but to get to know one person like a week.
Sure.
Like it doesn't matter if I forgot their name, because how many times have you met someone and you're like, oh crap, I don't know that person's name. Like I would be like, oh crap, Sam, my wife. I'm like, what's that person's name? I can't remember for the life of me. But my goal was to meet like one person a week during those times, is because I always thought it was important to kind of understand people and kind of understand like how you can relate to people or how they can relate to you. Yeah. And I that's what I always liked about this. And that's probably one of the parts of the reason why I made this podcast, is because I wanted to meet people like you. Sure. I wanted to get your ideas on the board. I wanted to get what you think about certain things. And it always intrigues me, like, hey, like, what are you thinking? What can you bring to the table? What can you help people out with? What can you help myself with? So But does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we all have different ways. I mean, some people think they're doomed because they want to just keep to themselves and do these things. And, we have the more outgoing people and the less outgoing people. But any way you spin it, you need that support. You need those people in your life that are going to help. You need those people that you could call at any time to talk and say, here's a problem. I need kind of your thoughts and perspective on it, and we get into the details on relationships for a long time, but like, I think it's just something that we bring to the table because it's a valuable thing to have. Yeah. And when we're talking about currency in life and health, your financial planner sits you down and says, you're going to retire at this age. What do you need? Well, how much money do you need to get to that point and to live the way you want? I want to think of it as the exact same way. Yeah. I don't want to think about it any different. Your life expectancy is this. How are we going to get you to that point? And are you going to be living the way you want to be living at that point? Yeah. And we need to currently invest in 5 different things, all the things we've talked about, and say, can we invest in these now so that when we need it, when we retire, or the last 10 years of our life, you can consider that last decade of our life, can we cash in that, right? And be able to live a life that's not full of disability and disease. Yeah, right? I think that's a good point to like end off, and I think that's a good point to stop. Sure. I definitely do appreciate your time and your availability to do this, and I think a lot of people are going to listen and watch this and be like, this is very awesome, and we're glad to have people like you exist in this world, because if it wasn't for your schooling, your efforts, your time, you wouldn't have been here. You could have been doing something else. You could have been, somewhere, and this wouldn't help anybody, right? Mm-hmm. So I think this is really great to end off on. And guys, please let us know if you have any questions, and please let us know what you kind of want to listen to for next. Like, if he wants to go deeper in like relationships, we could do a whole episode on that. We could do whatever you guys want when it comes to that content. And I think all this is important, obviously. I really do. And I wish we had like 10 hours to do all this, right? But we don't. We both have lives. We both have jobs. We both have, family and friends life. Yeah. But
what I want to end it off with is I want to thank you first of all, and then second of all, please, if you want, take your time. You want to close out with anything, you want to say anything, and then where people can reach you at if they wanted to, talk to you, call you, message you, something like that. So whatever you want to do on that aspect.
Yeah. So as he brought up earlier, I'm just starting to kind of reach out from a social media standpoint. So, I am practicing physician accepting new patients. Now, not really my main motivation for doing this. This is more so about how can I get my thoughts and ideas out to the community? How can I get people to engage in their own health in such a way that they can understand that their health is in their hands and they can make a change even tomorrow, right? That's the important part of this whole thing. Social media-wise, I've been kind of getting into Instagram, Facebook as well. Dr. Tyler J. Saunders is my handle, and then HealthSpan Chicago is the group I'm just starting on Facebook. The idea of this group is to get like-minded people to focus on ideas around optimizing for health span and being healthier and trying to decrease your risk for disease and kind of those types of focuses. It's very like, what can we do in the next step, those types of things. And then, I'm currently working on a website, but that's not up and running yet. But obviously, I'll let you know when that happens. And I think I'm really happy to be here. I'm really happy. I think this platform is a good one for me to kind of talk on. Yeah. And I do regular lectures and things like that. And I think that's something that hopefully will kind of get up and running soon. So, obviously, like you said, any comments about anything we talked about specifically, I feel like we just gave you a taste, and it's going to want a little bit more. But I got a lot of thoughts on a lot of different things. So, but I appreciate you having me, and I'm glad you were able to come up here and, have this from our clinic.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for watching, listening. Please, like we said, is please comments, questions, any concerns, anything you guys want to talk about next, and then like, comment, share, and please get this out to everyone you love and care about, because like I said, we're doing this to help people out, and I'm glad that just because you're accepting new patients doesn't mean like you're on a sales pitch. You're just like, hey, I don't, and you said before, like, just because you're a new patient doesn't mean you're going to stick with me. Maybe it might not coordinate.
Might not be a good fit. Yeah.
But I can. I'm getting off the topic. But thank you guys for listening and watching, and then we'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.